Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Perspective Podcast. And today we're with the usual Tim, the wonderful Tim.
Thank you very much.
Who is a psychotherapist and studied human development and got his doctorate recently in story in the self. And we have our wonderful guest, Deeshan, who
Hello,
is
everyone.
a photographer.
Thank you very much for having me.
We're delighted to have you, Deeshan. So today we're talking about creativity, with the emphasis being explore your creativity. So we're gonna talk about, with Tim, the psychotherapeutic benefits of creativity, and with Deeshan we're gonna ask him about his creative process and what drives him to take the photographs he takes, and a bit about his editing process, a bit about his background, and Tim's gonna recite for us some poems that he wrote passionately, and they're beautiful. And I'll talk a bit about some excerpts I found in researching the topic of creativity. And with that, Tim, would you have any opening remarks?
Yes, I would have. I'm told I'm never short for a word, but I'm told that anyway. I'll come up with some words or some sequence of words anyway. But I liked what you said there. I think, for me, creativity is a way of coping with life. It's giving shape or sense or meaning to my life. And I'm at my most creative when I am dealing with an experience, whether that experience be a difficult one, a harsh one, or a beautiful one. I have to try and put shape on that experience and write down what that has meant for me. And when I do that, I find that it's a great way of coping with my personal struggles. And I also find that creativity helps me find out who I am. So it's a very good way of exploring your own identity, right? So, for instance, I would have written poems about people who have committed suicide, or that's a wrong word, actually. We don't say commit anymore. We say ended their own lives tragically. So I would have written stuff on that because it would have affected me so much, the people I knew. So overcoming self-stigma, that I feel that I'm useless or that I'm failing or weak or whatever. And when I engage in a creative process, I am actually giving myself strength. I am giving myself meaning, and I feel, and I think this was a word we used, it's cathartic.
Oh, yeah.
It's cathartic. It gets rid of that, flushes that bad feeling out of my system. And I think that's why the people out there who may be viewing this or listening to this, find some way of expressing yourself. Some creative way, whether it's music, whether it's photography, whether it's writing words, whether it's running. Now, I think it's important that sports can be very creative. Some people are very creative with their bodies.
Yeah, some people have a traditional view of creativity that it has to be in art form. Like, it has to be video, it has to be music, but you can be creative with your body, as like nowadays yoga is a big thing, and yoga instructors are, and you can. It's just
like everybody should have their own like escape, and
like an outlet,
and like an outlet, because otherwise you'd be like a pressure cooker.
Yeah,
like you'd be just.
Yeah. That's a good analogy. Yeah,
my younger brother took up the ukulele during COVID. And he's now going to ukulele conventions, and they're all playing together, and he loves it, right? And he will spend an hour, he says, when I spend an hour on the ukulele and I'm singing all the songs I like, he says, I actually then I'm in a good space.
Yeah, but it is interesting how when you pour your heart and soul into something, it becomes your escape, and it opens so many doors for you, not only for yourself personally, like you learn so many things about yourself, but also, like you said, like he enjoys doing the conventions and stuff like that.
I think, interestingly, as I love language, you used, Deeshan, a lovely phrase there, and I love that metaphor you used there. You said, it opens so many doors. That's fabulous, because I think if we are, to me, that's what creativity is doing. It's opening doors into some other world for me. Yeah?
For me, it's like dimensions. It's like you fall into you open like portals, like like you see in sci-fi movies. It's like when you tap into these doors, like the opportunities are endless.
I think like for some viewers who might not know what we're talking about when we're saying like it's like entering another dimension, I know what you're talking about, Deeshan.
It's like when you're opening a new door.
See, when you experience it's almost like religious. It's like a spark. And me and John, actually, John, for our viewers, is the wonderful lad of Kerboot Productions who gave us his filming equipment to record this episode.
Yes, he told us he told me he was a videographer. I thought it's lovely. Videographer. Videographer.
We were talking about creativity before we filmed, me and John, before you got here, and we were saying like sometimes it's just about making yourself start on it, whether it's writing, whether it's singing, whether it's whatever it is, taking a photograph. But then sometimes in the process itself, even though starting it, you're like, why am I doing this? And you might not know why immediately. In doing it, there comes a point where you get that spark and suddenly it's a realization to you why you're doing it. But you can't necessarily explain it because the meaning is in the doing. That's the way John put it.
Yes, the meaning is in the doing.
The meaning is in the doing. That's very interesting.
It is, definitely. And that is actually, put my philosopher's hat on, that's part of Aristotle. Aristotle said we must do. And he also said we become good by being good. Likewise, you become bad if you keep repeating bad. So in other words, the more good we do, the more good we become. So to do is actually to become creative, So I think it is about doing.
Yeah. I think what I'll do is I'll go through some photographs you shared with us, Deeshan.
Yeah, sure.
Some of which we've already talked about before filming. Maybe I'll just go through them.
Yeah, sure.
So this one here, you can see it, Tim, can't you?
Yes, I can. It's a lovely photograph.
For the viewers, you'll have a photograph here, but this is a lovely photograph, and I wanted to ask you why you took from this angle, Deeshan, and in this moment, what made you get your drone and take that picture?
It was kind of like at that point in my life, I was going through a really tough time. And it was sort of like, when I'm out shooting, you look at different angles, different perspectives, and sort of like looking down back towards myself. And I noticed the line and the sort of like the wilderness around me, the space that there is around me. And I noticed like this is me, as you can see me. I don't know how clearly the viewers can see, but you can see me on the footpath, and it was like that's like me on my path to wherever I'm going in my journey, and around me there's just a wilderness, and I just have to keep focusing, no matter how hard it gets. You just have to follow your path.
That's a lovely image,
and that's why when I took it's really like. Oftentimes when I do my post work, it's a lot of me. I mentioned this to you before. It's like I just sit back and try to inspect the picture again and see like how did I feel in that moment, and like how can I sort of interpret that feeling into that picture, because it is like I am trying to portray a message.
I couldn't peg why immediately, Deeshan. This was one of the photographs that stuck out to me, and that's why it's one of the first ones here that I collected, because I think it is that image of a road. And Tim, you'll know I quoted in a previous podcast a poem by Robert Frost, who I love, but he has this poem called "The Road Not Taken," and I'll just say the end of the poem, which is two roads diverged on a path, and I took the one less travelled by. And that has made all the difference. And like, it's that idea that at every point in our lives, we come to this junction where it's, I go to the left or the right or wherever. And for reasons sometimes not known to us, we take a certain path and that's where we go. But I think that's why it stuck out for me at first. Do you have anything to say on that, Tim?
Yeah, I could have a good bit to say on it, all right. One of the things, I mean, again, go back to the metaphor. We used the metaphor of door. Now you have the metaphor of road. And road and journey are big metaphors in life. And we're all on our own path. And Deeshan was talking there. He said, okay, the wilderness is around the road. And I'm sure a lot of our viewers, as well as myself and yourself, Dylan, and Deeshan, we experience the wilderness in our lives. And we have to make a path. And I liked what you said when you're describing that taking this photograph was focusing you on, well, no, I have to be in charge of myself. I have to get some map out of the wilderness.
Yeah.
Right? This is your map out
Paving
of the
my way.
Yeah. So you have a map for your journey. So in fact, you are actually mapping your. So what your photography in that photograph, you're mapping a way out of the wilderness.
Yeah.
Because you had linked that. Sorry, Deeshan.
Yeah, go on.
You had linked that to identity earlier, Tim.
Yes.
Or creativity.
Mm-hmm.
And what was you going to say, Deeshan?
No, I was just saying, like the poem that you recited, it's like the road less traveled.
Yes.
You mentioned, and that is also part of what made me take that picture, is because, choosing photography as a passion, something to pursue as a career, it's not very common. It's not very safe or stability wise, But yeah, it is a challenging experience to pursue that as a career. So
I think another word there that I'm listening to there, which is a very important word for me as I get older, passion. Find your passion. And I know anyone who really talks about careers will say you're very lucky if your career is your passion.
Oh yeah.
And oftentimes, and I know for most of my life, my career wasn't my passion, but it became my passion now and again. There were moments when I was passionate about it. And I think something that you're passionate about, that's another key or door for creativity, because it's, and I think to follow your passion, as you say, it mightn't lead, it might be very, what would I say?
It might be there's no straight line to success.
Correct. That's the problem. There's no straight line
to success.
There's
it's
just
like
different paths.
There's just different paths, and you just have to take it one day at a time and just really acknowledge, really look back and what's this trying to teach me, and just keep on moving, because you cannot stop.
Mm-hmm. One thing I had mentioned about your photographs earlier, Deeshan, before we filmed, was I love the colour in them all.
No, thank you.
And some you've edited to alter and enhance the colour. Others, it seems to me,
most of my post work is just to sort of enhance the colour. Very rarely I would totally change a colour, because I'd like to keep it as sort of natural as possible.
This one here, the colours are gorgeous.
That's back home in Mauritius. This point is called Makonde, and it's one of the beautiful spots. But yeah, the color contrast is what I love. The colors of the water, and how it kind of blends into the green.
It's gorgeous. And I love this road here.
Yeah, it's one of the famous roads. So I really hope you guys get a chance to visit, and then you do that drive. It's a beautiful, and there's actually on top of the rock there you can actually climb up.
Maybe if the podcast takes off, Tim, we can.
Again, I take it you use the
drone.
The drone for
drone,
that. Yeah, it's fabulous.
Yeah, and I use the wide angle.
Oh yeah.
As well.
But I agree with you there, Dylan. So, the colours, the contrasts of the colours and the green.
Yeah,
of the
it's just how they all blend in. It kind of represents also to me. It's like what, yeah, and also the how nature is blended with beautiful colors.
Yeah.
As you can see, there's blue on the skies and there's blue in the water, but they're different shades.
See, for me, the first thing I intuit when I look at that photograph is I just have this feeling that this is beautiful, and I think the colours are a big reason why, with the passion put in. But I think beauty is a value that we give to things, almost like money. And for people who might think what's the utility of creativity? Well, we all have something in our lives that we've deemed to be beautiful at some stage, And what are we doing when we are prescribing that to something? We're saying, this has got my eye for whatever reason. So that's the first thing I thought when I looked at that anyway.
Interesting there. Perspective is the name of our podcast. And one scholar I studied was John Henry Newman, who was a cardinal in the Catholic Church, but he started out as Church of England and ended up... but he had an interesting point, and I thought it was interesting because it deals with perspective, and it's almost about that photograph there of that space that you took with the drone. What do you call it? That point in Mauritius, the Maconde, was he said, when I get into disputes with others, I feel I must mount up upon a viewpoint, that I must go up a mountain and look down. And in his writings, the word that he always used was take a view. And he used to say, oh, I have to take a view, which meant I have to pull back. I have to see this in perspective. So he was very well aware of perspective, that we always have to mount. You say mount an eminence. An eminence was a high point, to take a view. And I thought it was beautiful because that picture there is a view, and it's a perspective of beauty.
Oh yeah. Because really, another thing that I found interesting is because, like, growing up when we used to go to that point, you actually admire the sea. You know, you see the vast of the ocean, and that's why it's amazing. But this time I flipped it towards us. You know, like what we're missing behind us.
Yes.
Yeah.
You know, because usually I'd be looking this way.
Yes.
But this time I'm looking that way, and
Yes.
you can see how the patterns actually make sense. And it was like a kind of a reminder that, you know, you got to look around because there's beauty in everything, really.
Mm-hmm.
And great segue, because I'm going to go to this photograph that viewers will see.
We spoke about that a lot.
Yeah, this is my personal favourite one because it deals with perspective bluntly. Like, it's you'll see the image on the screen for the viewers, but it's you, Deeshan. To me, it was like you looking at the world, but the world looking back at you. So if you want to talk about this
one, I actually labeled it "The World Through My Lens."
No way.
You know, and it's basically, I used a lens bowl to get this perspective, and I just sort of put it in. It was in Ackle Island, and
Beautiful place.
yes, it's a very peaceful.
Oh, very
and
peaceful.
I think, you know, for creativity as well,
Oh.
it really fueled.
Yeah.
That, you know, it's
Yeah.
so peaceful up there,
Mm.
and so yeah, like I sort of was experimenting with the lens bowl because it was my first time using it, and I just wanted to know, like, to what length I can take it. And so when I, again, like, just play experimenting with it, and I sort of noticed the colors of the sky popping behind me, and I realized, I was like, that would be a really good shot to try and focus within. And as I was taking it, I realized it was like me in my world, and using my lens to go through it. And it is like a perspective also, as if, like, I'm stuck in my world of photography, and around me there's another world
Yeah.
as well.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
So Tim, if I could ask a bit about your creative process, you've brought for the listeners 2 poems that you wanted to recite.
I have, yeah. And I suppose one of the things, I studied poetry at college before I ended up writing it. And I know that obviously when you study it academically for 4 years, it leaves a mark on you. And so I knew what the process was like. I read an awful lot of poetry. I have a book here that I would recommend to people, and I love the title. It's Poems That Make Grown Men Cry.
Wow.
And now, why do I say that? I say this because I'm a psychotherapist, And one thing I find that one of the most healing things for us is to cry. I experienced that when my father died. And I remember feeling like I was in a vice grip, that almost as if there were wires wrapped around me, and I was and a screw was tightening on me. And then when I cried, I noticed all this energy, this bad negative energy, left me. Crying is so healing. And I love the title of that, Poems That Make Grown Men Cry. And some of the best poems are in that I actually like and I use in my when I lecture now. Because I think as a psychotherapist, we want to be healed. And for me, when I write a poem, it's to heal me, okay? I'll read one that I wrote there very recently. And I was coming back from Italy. Myself and my two brothers have a little place down in Italy, and we go down there a good bit. And again, just like Deeshan is talking, or we were talking off camera earlier on, talking about the colours in Italy. The colours are fabulous, rather than the sort of more bland colours in Ireland. But interesting enough, I got on this plane and I saw this lovely family getting on. Father, mother, son and daughter. But the son had a bald head. He's about 10. And then immediately I saw, he's no eyebrows, so I knew chemotherapy. So here's a kid of 10 years of age who is, I don't know what stage his cancer was at. I didn't know. But I felt I had to write a poem about it. I felt I had to deal with this. And looking at it, I said, oh my goodness. If I was the father there, how would I deal with that? Or if I was the mother there, how would I deal with that? If I was the brother there, how would I do that? Or if I was the boy himself, how would I do? So I put myself in the boy's shoes and I wrote what's called a villanelle. Now, a villanelle is a type of poem that has repeated lines like a chorus. And I based it on this poem by Dylan Thomas. So I'm just going to read one verse from Dylan Thomas. And it's, do not go gentle into that good night. His father is dying and he's talking to his father. Do not go gentle into that good night. Old age should burn and rave at close of day. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. Though wise men at their end know dark is right, because their words had forked no lightning, they do not go gentle into that good night. So he wanted his father to keep fighting against dying. So I said, Now, the beauty of a villanelle is that you repeat certain lines. And the lines are repeated, okay? Now, I decided to put myself in the place of the 10-year-old boy. And this is what I got. Boy on chemo, villanelle. So the boy is addressing me. Look me in the face and smile, for I am of your kith and kin. I bear your burden with no guile. I am a harbinger for the briefest while, to warn that wasting time is sin. Look me in the face and smile. There is no need to ape the world's style, for I have learnt through pain and prick of pin. I bear your burden with no guile. Look at my balding head, my public chemo file, and learn to drink life's cup despite the din. Look me in the face and smile. I am only 10 and have only lived a while, and dread my going and my boxing in. I bear your burden with no guile. Take nothing for granted on this human isle. Take nothing for granted on this human isle. Be thankful for small mercies and you'll win. Look me in the face and smile, for I bear your burden with no guile.
It's beautiful.
So I put myself in the space of the boy. Could I do that, you see? Now, again, as a psychotherapist, one of the things that is important in psychotherapy is listening. And a second thing is empathy. And empathy means putting yourself in the shoes of another. And I remember when I was training as a psychotherapist, they said, we must have the imagination to be empathetic. And if I'm in a class and a kid comes in and say he's a different coloured skin and someone has mocked him, I try to show empathy. You have to try, well, what would it be like if I was that boy? And I think that's what I was trying to do in that poem. I was trying to put myself. So empathy would be a very important, as well as listening, you have to have empathy for the person. So that poem, even when I was reading there, I was getting a bit emotional because I just felt so sad and so empathetic for this kid. So that's that poem.
Yeah, that was just the image alone is like really powerful, and there's something about and particularly like when you see children who are sick, it's like it really challenges your like why we're here and what the meaning of everything is. But something I love about children is that like there's something so creative about childhood in that like children have such imaginations, and it's nearly like the creativity goes as you get older.
In fact, they unlearn it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's something that like my brother talks about with music. He's like, all my life experiences, I've had to unlearn so much to be able to actually write music. And I thought that was interesting. And I had a recent thought too, like when I'm writing music, a song that I'm working on at the moment, well actually I've finished, is a song for my mother called The Time of Her Life. And John, who was our videographer, is actually working on the video. But something for me that was a decision in making music was, okay, I have all this vulnerability and all of these things internalized. So am I going to like basically go halfway with music? Am I going to write half of how I feel but veer off certain things that are too vulnerable? Or am I actually going to write music that's maybe I'm putting myself out there, and people have said I have a tendency to wear my heart on my sleeve, but as far as I'm aware, the people that you could reach by being that vulnerable, that makes it worthwhile. And the people who don't understand, that's okay. Maybe they'll come around, maybe they won't, but I might have gone off there, Tim, but like that physical vulnerability in that child, like that spoke to you, and at the end of the day, that's what we're all faced with, our own vulnerability. And creativity to me seems like a sort of, it fights against that meaninglessness and that nihilism, because we just see beauty and we're moved by these things,
Yes. I think it's a strange paradox in life that the more you accept your vulnerability, the stronger you actually become.
Oh, yeah.
We're talking about vulnerability there. And one of the things that, that makes life priceless is the fact of our mortality. And one of the things, I've never yet written a poem about it, I always find, say, for instance, plastic flowers, I hate them because they're so artificial.
Yeah.
They're so perfect for no reason.
Yeah. You see, what makes a flower valuable is the fact that it's going to wither, but its beauty lasts, and then it blooms, and then it dies.
Yeah.
Even that alone makes it precious.
Yeah, because of the lifespan of it.
Yeah, and the same for ourselves. And I think that's part of our vulnerability, getting in touch with our mortality. So it's interesting. Now, I'd like to read something here, which I thought this was. I don't want to bore you guys, or bore the listeners. These are for poems that make grown men cry. One of my favourite poets was Samuel Taylor Coleridge. And Coleridge wrote an awful lot about creativity. And he said creativity, he called it the esemplastic power, which comes from the Greek plasso, which means to bend, right, or to mold, from which you get plasticity of the mind, right, plasticity. And he said that imagination was plastic. It was plastic, and he called it SM plastic because it forged all the different bits into one. So he says the imagination is the putting a unity on what he called the multeity. But anyway, he has a poem here that he wrote, that he was sitting beside his little baby, Hartley. And he wrote it for Hartley. And you talked about, there's something about kids. And there definitely is something about kids now, okay, I think this is interesting. Now, Coleridge himself ended up taking drugs. And he probably wasn't the best of fathers, but his children were lovely. And he was an interesting character if you read him at all. But anyway, he had this, I just thought this was lovely. He said he has his baby down beside him. He's in a cottage in the Lake District in Cumbria in England, and he has a fire going, right? Dear babe that sleepest cradled by my side, whose gentle breathing heard in this deep calm, fill up the interspersed vacancies and momentary pauses of the thought. My babe so beautiful, it thrills my heart with tender gladness thus to look at thee, and think that thou shalt learn far other lore, and in far other scenes. For I was reared in the great city, pent amid cloisters dim, and saw nothing lovely but the sky and stars. But thou, my babe, shall wander like a breeze by lakes and sandy shores, beneath the crags of ancient mountains, and beneath the clouds, which image in their bulk both lakes and shores. And you will see mountain crags, so shalt thou see and hear the lovely shapes and sounds intelligible of that eternal language which thy God utters. Now, I don't want to go any much further, but did you see he had this prayer for his child, that the child would see more than he'd see and wouldn't be pent up in a city. Now, that got me. Dostoevsky also has a lovely part in, I forget now which book, is it? It's Demons, I think. But he has about a man who suddenly becomes a believer when he sees his firstborn child, you know, and it's a gorgeous, tender part. But anyway, we mentioned that child.
But it's funny because I think that's why we value children in a way. Like, that's why everyone loves kids, because we love their imagination and we love how they see the world through this lens. But then at some point in our development, as we become disillusioned, it becomes no longer like acceptable, or people look down at you when you start looking at things.
There's a beautiful song called Daydream. We can put it on afterwards. It's by this artist called Lily Mayola. Lily, I know her name is, and she was on the X Factor, and it was about Daydream, and the opening lines is really, I think it's, you know, she says, you know, when you're kids, you know, you're playing astronauts and, or, you know, rock star or whatever. Nobody tells you to not do that. Like, you know, you play as a kid, and everybody's gonna encourage you. Like, you want to be an astronaut today, you be an astronaut. You want to be on a rocket ship, you be on a rocket ship. But then as the song goes on, it kind of shows you, like, you know, now suddenly you're 18. You know, you have to stop all this because life happens around you and it hits you so fast. But I think it's a beautiful song. So if you guys get a chance, I really check it out. But it was just like, it made me think. It was like, it is true. When we're kids, our imagination have no boundaries, and we can be ourselves, and no one's gonna give out to you. But then comes to a certain time, you're like,
yes,
stop doing that. You're not a kid anymore. You know, and it's just when that happens, it confuses you. I remember being 12, and you know, when you're being told you're not a kid anymore. To an extent, that is true, but in terms of imagination wise, it does challenge your childhood. You're like, but I was always like this.
Now something comes to mind as you're talking there, Deeshan, and about watching children play, or children who want to be an astronaut, as you say, or a fireman. That was our one. Or I remember my father asked me, what would you want to be? And he said, would you be a priest? And I said, no, a pope. You know, because children have that idea, like, obviously people were talking about a pope or something at the time. But anyway, there's this theory in psychology or psychotherapy, and it's called the theory of flow, and it's called flow theory. And when a child is playing, they say they're in flow. So if you watch a child playing, their world becomes so real to them. It's their imaginary world, but they're in flow. And one thing that finds that when you're in flow, you're not suffering from a depression. You're not suffering from blood pressure, because you've gone into this state of actual abandonment to...
Like Deeshan said, another dimension.
Another dimension.
Yeah.
That's exactly it. And in fact, you also said there, Dylan, it's akin to religious experience, creativity.
Ooh, and isn't it great you don't have to get like high out of your bananas to get there?
No.
Like you could do something.
Especially with your own creativity, there's no right or wrong answer. It's your path,
Okay, maybe we just bring back to the photograph there that's on the slide there.
Yes.
I like this because Deeshan might say something about it, and it's Loch Corrib or Corrib River in Galway. Yeah. I just like, just maybe you'd say something about that photograph, because I can see that's very therapeutic. But anyway, let you talk about it first.
Yeah, it kind of goes like that's actually my favorite photograph that I've clicked so far. My personal favorite.
I remember. Yeah.
It's just it's more like the atmosphere. It was my first solo trip. It was my first time out with the camera, and it's kind of when I could be myself and be like actually dare to take any pictures that I wanted, and actually told myself that you can actually pave your way with creativity, and the reason why I love this one in particular is I was just out on a walk in Galway, and I took the first rare prior to this one, and I didn't get the exact shot that I wanted, that I had in mind, and it's because I didn't have the right lens with me. Now usually I would be like, oh, never mind, another day, I'll do it.
Yeah.
But there was something inside of me that was like, no, you have to go back and get that lens. And my Airbnb was like just 2 minutes away from me. It was like, no, you gotta just go and get it, because you're not gonna get that color, you're not gonna get that temperature, you're not gonna get that atmosphere again. So you gotta seize the moment. So I went back and I took the shot, and this is the exact shot that I had in mind, pictured. And after I took it, I was like, it really got like hit me across. It made me think of like, I listened to that little spark inside of me that said like, no, you have to do this, and it kind of made me think like, if you listen that initially that was my gut instinct, listen to my gut instinct, and my end result was something that I really wanted, and it kind of made me understand more about myself. It's like, if you follow your gut instincts, and you go, like, because your instincts are never wrong, and it kind of paid off. And in the end, like when I look back to the picture, it's sort of the Corrib River is the fastest flowing river, and to just freeze it for that one instant, and it just, there's something about it, like looking at the colors of the water, the way the water shapes, and the way it flows, and even the middle bit where there's the friction of that's creating a bit of waves. It's just, there's something therapeutic about it, that you can see, like, even though there can be friction in life, but there's also calmness in other areas that you can focus on.
I want to play devil's advocate for a minute, Deeshan, because the point of this broadcast is to say to the viewers, or to encourage them, not to tell them, like, try explore your creativity, whether you're 20, 10, 30, maybe one day you decided to write something down, maybe it's a comedy script, and you just put it down for like 10 years and you never went back to it. Just maybe do that. But one thing I think that stops people is this idea of talent. And one study I wanted to bring up, which I'll bring up on talent, basically said that we see talent afterwards. So basically, when someone gets an amazing photograph and you go, geez, by God, he's talented. You didn't see the hours put in for him to study photography. Or people, like with me, what I want to ask you, Deeshan, is with me, I've definitely had that chip on my shoulder through the years of like, do I really think I can do music? Like, am I that talented? And I think it stops a lot of people. The idea that I'm not one of those talented. So I want to ask you, like, did that ever come up for you?
Oh yes, definitely. Yeah. It's the reason why at some point in my life I stopped photography altogether, because I grew up with the YouTube age. When YouTube was kind of launching, and you kind of look.
Yeah, around the like late 2000s, 2007, I think.
2000s. Yeah, no.
YouTube.
I tapped into YouTube in 2013, around that time. So when it was like
when it took off,
when it was like starting to take off. And so you start comparing yourself to other creators, and that's something you should never do.
Yeah.
In terms of creativity, it's like you're like, I'll never get to that level, and sometimes you don't need to be to that level. You just have to be at your level and just take it one day at a time, and also understand that they found success in their way of channeling their creativity, their imagination, but we're all different. You should follow your path. You can never be someone else, because you can only be yourself.
And there's no one that is you except for you.
Yeah, no one can be the better version of you. Completely. You do stop yourself thinking, oh, I don't have the knowledge, I don't have the experience, I don't have the equipment needed. But again, like it kills a lot, and like self-doubt kills a lot of our dreams. And again, like it's something that I think all of us have experienced it one way or another in our lives, but it should not limit us to keep going, to be ourselves.
So sorry, Tim, did you want to say something?
Yes, I did. One of the things that they say in psychotherapy these days, or in psychology these days, about comparisons, that and I think for teachers this is very important, because it's very negative. You say, for instance, you take a class and there's 30 in it, and say you give a test, and say you start arranging them in order of who came first in the test, but somebody comes last. So can you imagine handing that back and you say to the boy, you're last?
I was often in that position.
And that is
me too.
And I think that is a horrible way.
That's why I had to go to Tim's classes.
I was saying, that's why.
We don't know what to do with you.
That's a horrible way of teaching, because it's competitive. And one of the things you learn is, over the years that I've learned is, and the psychology says now, always compare yourself to yourself yesterday or the day before. That the only comparison that you should ever make is with yourself.
That's a Jordan Petersonism I love.
Yeah,
he says.
And all of that, but that's pretty rampant a statement in modern psychology. Compare yourself to yourself a year ago and you can see the progress. So that's a very good comparison. And also, when I started to really think about psychology and teaching, right? And this would be the same with creativity. So you can imagine you get children to write a poem, and you come up and you say, and I get a red pen and I start marking the wrong spellings. Right. Now, in education they say, no, you never do that. You actually, if you're correcting a spelling, right, in modern theory of teaching, so say somebody has spelled the word wrongly, you'd say there's 10 letters in it and they got one letter wrong, and you say, oh, there's 10 letters in that, you got 9/10 of the word right. So in other words, creativity, I think everyone can be creative. You shouldn't compare yourself with others. And you're right, this is where I have a problem with social media. I know that if I go on and go into poetry and I say, right, but I can think of 1,000 poets who are better than me, but I'm not going to compare myself to them. Or for instance, I have, which is horrible, like I have some people talking about, oh gosh, I have 5,000 friends on Facebook.
Oh,
I say, my God.
That's another thing.
But they're not friends, they're contacts.
Like,
Yeah.
there's
Crazy
there's two ways to look at it when you see someone who's talented. Like, I could look at Deeshan's photographs and go, there's no point in me taking photos on my iPhone anymore. Like, when I think it. But Or else I could look at Deeshan's photographs and go, you know what, Jesus, that makes me want to get my camera out and like.
And most artists want that, you know, like like what you said. It's like when I'm putting out work, it's not to. I think a lot of artists as well is like this. It's like we're not meant to make you feel bad. We want to inspire you to, and even if we can touch one person, for us that's a major deal, because knowing that we actually made an impact on you, for us it means like our job is kind of done, because that's what you want to do. You don't want to, like you say, it's like pushing each other, pushing others rather, to pick up the camera and start doing, or it could be just a different field, but at least just channeling that creativity.
Yeah, and I think deep down we all do admire when someone's creative. Like I told the both yous when I was in town the last time I met yous, one thing that caught me eye, I was watching this painter, and he was in front of Connolly Station, and he was painting this. It looked like an impressionist painting, and I was just like enamored by it. I probably looked like a stalker, but like I was standing there for like 40 minutes just looking at his process, because to me it was a privilege to look at an actual painter paint, and I was like, I wonder, he's leaving out some details and he's putting in others. I was like, what's going on in his mind? But one thing that fascinated me was every walk of life walked past him, whether it's people who were addicts in town or looked homeless walking past. I noticed them looking at the painting. Whether it was businessmen in suits who looked like they just came out of a Fortune 500 company, they were looking at the painting.
Yes.
Whether it was looked like single mothers coming out, or whether it was people from like, you know, Muslim background, whether it was, you know, the gypsies in town, the Romanians, whether it was, you know, traveller people, whether it was...
Because art connects us.
Yeah, like, I don't think... Yeah, to me, that was like as amazing as the painting itself. Was there is this deep-rooted thing that we all have about admiring what we perceive as talent, but it's funny, it's nearly like that photograph you took, Deeshan, where the world's looking back at you. It's like we're admiring something that's in ourselves, because like everyone could be creative, and just to go back to that study that I mentioned that suggests that talent is something we put on after the fact. This is a study by a scientist and music researcher, Daniel Levitin, that I cited to you before, Tim. And the point of it is, creativity is not a gift. Thanks to neuroplasticity, studies of violin players by Thomas Elbert have shown the region of the brain responsible for moving the left hand, the hand that requires the most precision in violin playing, increases in size as a result of practice. And then there's strong evidence of the talent position that music skills are acquired more rapidly than others in people who practice more. And it's purely a result of practice. And another thing that happens, like you alluded to, Tim, when you're in a classroom, teachers can have their preferences. And I think me and Deeshan are both in the camp where we were probably in the least of the preferences for the teachers. That's why I met you, Tim. Yeah. So, you know, all these factors are environmental and affect as well the potential in someone. Because if you don't see the potential in someone and foster it, how are they ever going to understand it for themselves?
Actually, I've always believed that the two most important professions in the world are medicine and teaching.
They shape up the whole...
Because they shape the individual. Obviously, medicine number one and education number two. And there's a striking similarity. A doctor must treat everyone the same. In other words, if I go to the ER or the emergency room,
they're not going to judge you.
They're not going to judge you. They're going to triage everybody. Whoever is the most serious, whether he's a murderer or whatever, whoever he is, it doesn't matter. He has to be, or she has to be seen first. Now, a teacher in a class, I remember there was one teacher, an old teacher said to me, this guy went on and lectured in college, and he says, he wasn't a great teacher, you know. I said, was he not? He said, and I said, why is that, Dick? And Dick was a brilliant teacher. He says, he only taught the top group in the class. He left the others down the back. I remember
this, yeah.
He only taught...
I remember you were mentioning
in other words, but that's not teaching.
No.
Like medicine, I have to go in there and teach every single boy or every single, and each of them deserves as much
Maximum
of my
effort.
attention as the other.
And to sum up that study, Tim, and this relates to exactly what you're saying, in another study, students were divided into two groups based on teachers' evaluations of their ability or their perception of talent, is another way to put it. Several years later, the students who achieved the highest performance ratings were those who had practiced the most, irrespective of which talent group they'd been assigned to previously, suggesting that practice is the cause of achievement, not something correlated with it. And it further suggests that talent is a label we're using in a circular fashion. And the way Levitin describes it is, when we say someone's talented, we think we mean that they have some innate predisposition to excel. I'm reading this off. But in the end, we only apply the term retrospectively after they've made a significant achievement. Like, in other words, if one day I'm congratulated on my musical ability, people haven't seen me when I was 10 years of age and I couldn't get a nice sound out of a guitar for the life of me. But my ma was like, "You're brilliant." So I just kept doing it, you know?
Yeah.
And my dad was like, "Oh, would you not get a job in a bank?" But
Get a real job.
A real job. Yes, you see, we've all heard that, and creative people have always heard that. Why don't you get a real job?
It's the same that stopped me. I remember I was telling you I got accepted in post college for photography.
Yeah.
Right after school, and it was pretty tight. Now, us facing international fees, which is at that time it was 15 grand
Right.
a year, but this course was 8 grand, and it was for I think a year or two. I think it was. But I really wanted to do it, and my parents were like, "No, there's no future in this. You're not gonna do it," and immediately that kind of shatters you.
No, it does,
But,
of course.
You know, you start, you're like, okay, maybe I'm on the wrong path right here, and that's the thing. Like it challenges you, and it's a make or break moment. But oftentimes when I like having worked in multiple places now, you meet people and they're like, "Oh yeah, I had to let go of my dream of doing whatever they were pursuing," and they're like, "Oh yeah, I do think about it. It's like, what if I actually took the risk? What if I actually didn't listen to others around me, or I went the other way and I followed my heart? My life would have been different." But yeah.
Yeah, I think we both faced that as well, Tim. Like, growing up, come from our backgrounds, there's a certain stigma to. I think what happens is, especially in backgrounds of disadvantage, people are well-meaning, the people who raise you, but they want you to excel, and the way that's seen.
Yeah, they mean well.
Oh, they mean well. Oh,
They mean-
yeah. Because they're thinking of what could possibly
They want you
happen.
to be safe and secure.
Pure. Yeah, yeah. Interesting, which also is good for creativity. I remember one of the most wise or the wisest phrases, thoughts or whatever was ever said to me was by a supervisor I had to train as a teacher twice. I trained for 4 years to be a religious educator and in English literature. But then at 50, I went back and retrained as a special ed teacher. And I had brilliant supervisors. And so I was 50 now retraining, right? And the wisest thing I ever heard anyone say, and it was something that I always sort of believed in after that, was she says, "Don't worry about the way you teach." She says, "First of all, when you get a kid in front of you, try and find out the way the student learns. And if you find out the way the student learns, you change your way of teaching to teach the boy or the girl that way. Because people learn. So, and then, which is an interesting thing maybe for a future podcast, would be what they call styles of learning.
Yeah.
That everybody has a different style, and there may be 6 or 7. I forget how many styles there are. And a good teacher will present their classes open to the different styles of learning. Yeah. So you give them options. So if you're giving them an essay, you would say, well, maybe you could do a little video or whatever. You in other words, you'd be open to another style of learning.
That's what makes a great. Sorry to cut you off.
No, go.
It's what makes a great teacher. It's like when they can craft a specific learning system for each student.
Yes.
And that makes a huge difference.
Oh,
And
absolutely.
it's what made a big difference for me, because I always struggled academically in school. But like in Mauritius, it was terrible because in Mauritius it's such a competitive academic environment, which I couldn't keep up. But when I came to Ireland, it was the difference that I had an amazing teacher called Mr. Clerkin in Fionn-Bara, and I was in Cabra. And he kind of took the time and be like, okay, well, we're gonna take you out of class for a bit and start working on your weak spots. And by doing so, it kind of boosts my confidence. Be like, okay, well, someone's actually taking the time to sit down with me and work with me to try to get me up to speed. Just as a kid, like 9-year-old kid being in a new environment, new country.
Absolutely.
Everything was scary, but just that those sessions with him kind of boosted not only my confidence, but also like, oh, you're not a loser, like, because being when you're not academic, you often tell yourself like, oh, I'm the loser of the class because I'm always not doing so well at this. But just having that teacher who actually sits down with you, navigates with you, and try to understand you, like basically drops down to your level and really mentors you step by step. It makes a huge difference.
It's
towards the end of my school, like when I graduated, I even told this to my mom. I was like, if it wasn't for his sessions, I don't think I would have been that confident and actually brought up to the speed. So it just shows you like teachers actually make up a lot.
In fact, teachers can destroy kids too. But if you're lucky enough to have one good teacher at primary school, that's enough to get you through, because they see some worth in you and are able to mould it, I suppose.
I think we've all had some sort of like bad teachers where they've told us we're not going to amount to anything in our lives.
I always credit you, Tim, probably in every podcast like that. You were one of the few who were like, oh, you have potential, So
yeah, I think as I said, how does the student learn, and then spot their gifts and point it out to them, because oftentimes you have a gift and you don't know. I mean, I remember saying to you that you had a philosophical mind. And you have. And I knew that was actually, and for you, I know you said it to me, that was a turning point for you, was it not?
Yeah, because previously my background, although I have a family of really bright people, none of us are academics. And the way I mean that is not that we're not intelligent, but that we're just not
Bookish.
in that class of people who are deemed intelligent, I guess. And it's a tragedy really, because so many people I know are so talented, but they're not. But the Leaving Cert told them different, and skill told them different.
If I listen to my Leaving Cert results, I'd be like,
no, I mean that's actually COVID taught us a lot about how little or how least important the Leaving Cert actually is, because people were able to go to college without. With grades that were given to them by their teacher. Yeah. So in other words, we have to really look and see these terminal exams. How useful are they?
We talked about,
and I think we said you mentioned this before when we met. It's like it, and as we all, a lot of us realize, it's a memory game.
Yeah,
at the Leaving Certs.
It is a memory game. Yes.
It's really, if you can memorize something, and it doesn't matter if you understand it or not, if you can just copy and paste this, you're gold.
Exactly, and to your point, Tim, talking about people having different learning styles, we know that's a cause of neurology. Like this research is exploding on how people have actually different brains and different ways of processing information. There's people who are visual learners, image oriented in their frameworks of perception and being able to abstract and think creatively.
Yes.
There's people who are verbal. There's people who are logical.
Yes.
Problem solving. Sorry, but like, why not cater to everyone's own strengths and understand? I remember in the last podcast, Tim, you were talking about an individual education plan, but wouldn't it be brilliant if we lived in a world where every individual education plan was catered to their way of thinking, their interests.
Yeah.
What is this,
lot
kids?
of work for teachers, but if we put the money into it and the resources into it, you'd probably come up with that ideal educational
and not just
system.
to talk about the education system. What about the community? What about volunteering programs? What about youth organisations? Like there's so many ways to get involved in someone's life.
Yes, and actually, for anyone who's listening, we want to see that creativity is not just about photography. It's not It's not just about poetry. It's not just about music. It's about everything and anything that will help you to escape bad reality.
Yeah.
That will help you cope. That will help you put shape on your identity, whatever it is.
So, Tim, would you mind reading out? You had another poem to read
had
for
another
our
poem.
viewers.
Yes, and one of the things, I suppose, in my psychotherapist hat on, is as a young man, relationship with father-son relationship is complex. And Freud, obviously, was the first that pointed that out. So you had Oedipus complex and various other complexes that he went through and was renowned for. And I suppose this particular poem is my attempt to recapture my father, because now I would love to sit down with him and have a conversation about life in general. Now, he suffered a good bit in his life, and I wasn't really appreciative of how much he had suffered. And I wasn't appreciative of that because young people just want to get on with life and
I don't want to care about it.
And like that was his problem, not mine. And now I'd like to and then at one stage he says to me, "Someday, Tim, you will understand." And now I do understand. But not alone do I understand, I accept it. My father got polio when he was 40. And I think it ruined his life because he lost the use of one arm, and then he had to go down a job. He was demoted because he couldn't do his previous job, and he hadn't got enough, he had to have two arms for it, Anyway, this is called the first person pronoun. Now, there's another thing about being creative. I want to say this is an interesting point that just struck me of late. Sometimes I get in the way myself. That, in other words, there's too much of me there, right? Mm-hmm. That, in other words, I'm standing in the way of what I'm seeing. Okay? So, in other words, that's my ego. That my ego gets in the way of myself. And I think a lot of people live on the ego. Out there in the world of competition, it's all ego. But when we're talking here, it's all soul and it's all self. Because, I mean, that's the level of our communication, is it not?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so this is called the first person pronoun. And what I wanted was to say less of me, less of I, and less of my.
Okay.
And what I wanted to do was focus on my father. And he had seen his own father die at 40. And he said he put his hand on his father's head and he says, "My father died at 40 from tuberculosis and he had a full head of black hair."
No way.
Right? So this is the first person pronoun for Thomas Quinlan. So I'm addressing it to myself. How dare I even mention the first person pronoun? Never mind complain in this world of dissonant voices that moan on and fill our ears with jarring notes and sparring interpretations. Reality escapes my bemused mind, refuses to be tied down, recalcitrant colt. Once in the distant past, my father stopped me in my tracks. "One day you will understand," he said. Understand? No, never. Accept, maybe accept, that nasty things happen to good people. That the grief of a 12-year-old boy weighed hard. A boy who lovingly stroked his dying father's head of black hair, embittered not by the lot the fates had dealt him at so tender an age, but by the plight of his overworked mother, condemned to scrub and save, and so much more no words can capture. How dare I complain now that I have conjured up your stoic presence, your selfless toil for your children, your perseverance despite the plight meted out by chance and circumstances. I remain in awe of you, Father, for your courage in adversity. I remorsefully withdraw my I, my me, my, and am content to accept my lot, even if I will never understand the perverse persistence of the first person pronoun.
Love it, Tim.
So I didn't want myself getting in the way of my father, that I don't want my I, my me. You know, people, I suppose if you come across somebody like President Trump, whose every word is about themselves, and you realise that...
Or any politician,
really.
really.
It's sort of narcissism, you know. Everything is me, 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 me.
Yeah.
And if you get up and talk about me all the time, you know. So that's where that came from. And I suppose it's like you and the artist, and you're watching the layers. And you were saying there an interesting thing. Now, you see, if I go back to the previous poem I read, I had to reread Dylan Thomas's poem. And then I went, and if you're talking about the process, I then had to go and I actually put down, okay, the lines that are repeated is lines 1, 6, 12, 18. And the other ones that are repeated, 3, 9, 15, 19. And then I had to do the rhyming scheme, A, B, A. So I wrote out that.
I was wondering what that was, Tim.
Yes.
I was like, ABBA, ABBA, ABBA.
Yeah, ABA. And that's the rhyming scheme, right?
Oh, wait.
And so in other words, it's like the photographer. The photographer is going to look at it, I want to change that bit of colour there. And I would have had to write that maybe 5 or 6 times to get it into the shape that it is. Now, the one on my father, I had to make sure it was in different shape.
Yeah.
That, in fact, I got the last line first, for instance, you know? So the last line is the perverse persistence of the first person pronoun. Where does that go? It's obviously it's the end. So I got the last line first.
No way.
So then I had to build up to that.
So that was the start of that poem,
That's
Tim?
the start of the poem, the perverse persistence of the first person pronoun.
And how did that phrase come to your mind?
Again, I write a good bit in Irish, and in Irish an awful lot of alliteration. So perverse persistence of the first person pronoun. So it's 4 P's. So I was experimenting in my mind with the sound, the P sounds. Perverse persistence, P, 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 P. So I'd be, so for instance, when you're writing poetry, for me, it's the sound that matters.
Yeah.
And it's like music, you see.
Yeah.
And I said, no, that doesn't sound well. So I have to say it.
That's what I love about the music process too. Like, I might include in this podcast a song I wrote for my mum, which I'll give you both a listen to. I haven't actually given, but like the poem for your father, Tim, it just is about my reverence for my mother's selflessness in raising me and put me on the path that I'm on. But yeah, there's something so, like we talked about the spark, like with music in particular and poetry, but I'm wondering how it relates to photography, Deeshan. But it's like this synchronicity of our patterns. It's becoming receptive to things coming together in some intelligible way where it makes sense, whether it's a rhyming scheme, whether it's a melody. You're like, that's how this should sound. Like with my mom's song, it was such a long process. I actually recall playing it to her when she was terminal. I didn't know she was going to die, but I knew she was very unwell. So I started writing her this piece on piano, and I'm glad I got to play it for her. But the lyrics only came after she died. But so many times I thought the song was taking so much from me. I thought to stop, but something in me didn't allow me to stop. I don't know if it was that reverence for my mum, like you with your dad, Tim.
Mm-hmm.
But it was like John said to me earlier, in the Dune, I got so much meaning, and we all said catharsis. In finishing my mum's song, it's nearly like the grief that I had for her, I could actually
express it in some way.
Yeah, and not just express it, but have it
Like you
that
can
I
breathe.
Yeah, exactly. like there it is. This song is all of that, and
You give it your all, like everything that. Yeah.
exactly.
That's
And
beautiful, man. I can't wait to hear it.
oh, thanks, Deeshan. Yeah, I'll try to include it with the podcast. I will include it with the podcast, and I'll give you both a listen.
Yeah, and I think we should also include it in the music therapy.
Yeah,
I am feeling
That's something I'm really interested about.
I
It's
nearly.
so
I
interesting.
think we want to go mountain climbing now, don't we? Hill climbing, anyway. At least.
yeah. What a segue.
I'm great. I'm great. My photographs are motivating people to get active as well.
Yeah. Well, that was a brilliant segue from there, Tim. so Deeshan.
Yeah.
Well, you scrolled onto the photograph.
In all seriousness, again we mentioned colour, but lighting as well. This photograph is amazing.
Thank
Please, the viewers will see it's this photograph you took of a mountain.
Yeah, it was down in Killarney, and I forgot the park's actual name, but yeah, it was again. It was just like one of these things where initially I saw the snow on the mountains, and it's always a classic shot for a photographer, but again, I was sort of complaining about the clouds.
Yeah.
And it was a very cloudy day, and because it was raining, and sort of on camera as I was adjusting my settings, I realized that with the perfect settings, the light is actually perfect on the mountain, and I was happy with it. There's a second one that I think I sent you. It was similar to this one, but I kind of like, again, like when I was editing, I was like, what more can I add to this? And sort of, I wanted to create an environment where it's like an escape, but as well, it shows you that even though it may not look perfect at the bottom because it's all dark at the bottom, it's like on the top there's always some sort of clarity. You just have to be patient and wait for it. And as you can see, like it's mostly dark, most of the image, but in my mind when I was editing, I was like, you can actually add the thing. It's
And what's beautiful,
it's the picture. It's the other picture. It's one of those pictures where I manipulated the most to try get it right. But the other picture, I think it's the next one towards this one. Yeah.
So this is the original.
No.
Oh,
they're separate.
These are completely different.
These are completely, but the angles are more or less the same. But this is the actual weather, how it was on that day. But I wanted to add more to it. I was like, what if I can manipulate more color into it and create a different atmosphere?
I think something I love about photography that separates it from music, for example, in a way, is it's like impressionist painters. It's you're capturing what's literally there.
Yeah.
Like when I'm writing a song, I can go back and re-record it or whatever. But if you want to capture a particular moment with a photograph, you need to be so clever about how you're doing it. But I love what you're saying there, Deeshan, how initially the clouds, the weather wasn't in your favor, but you actually made that contrast work so that the photograph
it's
is
like
nearly
turning
made
a negative
better.
into a positive.
Exactly.
It's like sometimes you just have to look for it, and a lot of times with photographs, like you said, you just have to have your camera ready at the right time, because if you miss for 1 second, you might miss it. But
I could see if you had a website where you could sell some of those images,
that's the goal. That's the goal I'm trying to go towards. But it's just
because that now is an image I could well imagine that people would want to buy.
Yeah, I've done a few giveaways on my social media just to kind of do more promotion, but that is the end goal.
Okay.
To sell prints.
But again, you see, you have to keep working at that.
You just have to keep working. It's like with anything, you can have really amazing material, but it's just getting the word out there, and that can take years.
That's the
there's
thing.
One thing I'm sort of fascinated by. Now, our last podcast, we did it on autism. And one of the things that struck me, Dylan, because you gave quite a nice summary of autism, and we were talking about Temple Grandin. And you were saying that Temple Grandin was talking about the way autistic people think, that they think in images. Isn't that correct?
A lot of them are image or associative thinking.
So I'm just
wow,
wondering,
really
now, for instance, I think literally in language, so it's linear.
Okay.
Now, I just want to ask Deeshan, would you think in images or do you think in words?
Now thinking about it, yeah, it is very imagery. It's like whenever someone is talking, I would always try to paint a picture.
That's
in my
interesting
mind.
now, you see.
You know,
Because
I would
that
always
struck
try
me
to-
about our last one, that your way of thinking, see, again, I'm interested in the way people think because, as I said, when I did special ed, it was brilliant. How do people think?
Yeah.
How do people learn?
And Temple Grandin found a new way of thinking she calls pattern thinking, or that's kind of like logical. I think I'm in that boat because whatever topic it is, to make sense of it, well, this relates to associative thinking, which I mentioned earlier. Maybe I don't have that right. Maybe it's image or visual thinking is separate and it's pattern or associative thinking that I'm thinking of. But my thinking style, if you remember, Tim, when you would try to get me good at maths, I always brought it back to philosophy. I was like, well, why?
Why
Why?
do you?
I
you
could
have to
only-
do this?
Yeah, I could only understand it. I was actually saying this to someone. I always thought I was bad at maths. I was saying it to you too, I think. But
Yeah.
I only found my ability to actually solve problems in maths to be so rewarding when I realised that I could relay it to problem solving in other areas like philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
So that's that associative pattern thinking. And Jesus, it's just exciting to think like the different ways people can think and solve problems.
Yes.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's that. So those mountains and those hills, and you know, in a way, they are very, what I say, primordial images because, you know, if you go to the west, might be a nice one for you to do is to do Croagh Patrick in Mayo. It has been a pilgrimage up that mountain for 5,000-6,000 years. It was Christianized when St. Patrick came. But before that, the pagans were all walking up there because the gods lived on the top of the mountains. And there's a pathway up there that millions of people have trod over those 7,000 years, you know. So I think that's why a mountain is very significant.
If I can ask you, Tim, about your thinking pattern or your thinking style, because you have this ability to relay so many different areas of knowledge, like whether it's poems, whether it's history, whether it's science, philosophy, like theology, like what is your, I'm thinking maybe you're associative thinker too, like what is, or let you speak on it, but what is your thinking? How does an idea come to your mind? How do you express it? How?
Yeah, I think it's down to me feeling. I start with feeling, strangely enough, and then I see, well, how can I express that feeling in a thought? How can I express that in a word? And again, I drifted academically. I was very much a drifter. At school we got no career guidance, right? Nobody said what you're good at or not. But I just admired one teacher and said, I want to be like that man.
Mr. Murray.
Mr. Murray. So I kept teaching and I wanted to teach. But I drifted from subject to subject, you know. And I remember somebody saying, you're crazy. One man said to me, God, he says, you're going sideways all the time. And I did really, because I kept picking up courses, you know, and I kept doing extra subjects rather than going into one subject on its own. And I really drifted that I ended up qualified in 5 different subjects, you know, it's crazy.
Yeah. I think you may be an associative thinker.
So
like
I'm an
himself
associative
then.
thinker, yes.
Yeah.
And I'd sort of say, oh, I came across that in literature. I came across that in...
Yeah.
I keep on...
That's an associative thinker.
So I'm
alright.
an
A
associative
pattern thinker, 'cause
completely.
You go, oh, so that made sense here.
And
you
in
can-
fact, I'm looking for patterns all the time.
I noticed actually when you first came in the studio, you were like, I'm receptive to the patterns around here in the walls, in the, like you were mentioning, all the wiring and all.
Yeah, yeah.
So that's very autistic.
Yeah, I mean, I actually think
I actually heard this quote once. It was like, I think we're all a bit autistic.
I think we
sometimes.
are,
Yeah, it is a spectrum.
and I think it is a spectrum, you know. And I think, again, I think to define people, it's very difficult to define people.
Yeah.
You know.
Jesus,
You know what I mean?
Your life
You could
trying
spend your life, and yeah. But anyway, this is the creativity podcast, and actually, to do a little bit of meta. Meta means beyond. Meta psychotherapy, right?
Okay.
So meta philosophy is where you go beyond the philosophy. Meta psychology then would be thinking about what is psychology. But it's interesting. What we're doing now is creative. We are actually being creative now. And if people are sitting down listening to this, they must realize that they're being creative. We are being creative because we put together music, poetry, and pictures. So we're being creative. And I think we must realize that creativity is anything that helps
Anything
us put
that
shape.
fuels you
Yeah.
Yeah.
from within.
Like, I'm just thinking now, I think conversation can be so creative. How you craft your words, how you craft, how you...
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Speech is a big part of the like when you can get great speakers. I'm sure you have speakers where you like the way they articulate their words, the way they navigate their sentence, or you just listen to them. It's such a...
And I think we're not
such
going...
a talent.
I mean, the big thing we're going for, which I also think, and there was a Spanish boy who was listening to this, and he said, what I liked was, it was so authentic.
Yeah.
And I think that's what... so if I was thinking of guests, I would know immediately
Who to bring.
who to bring, because you have to be authentic.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, no bullshit.
You know bullshit. You know what I mean? I can think of loads of people who'd love it.
It's what it got me more interested about this. Well, after listening to the last podcast, and I remember you reaching out to me a few months ago.
Yeah.
To see if I was interested. And, you know, I love how this is just, you know, it's your setup. You know, you've homemade this studio itself. And it's like, you know, you meet, like I told you last time, it's like you meet real people and it's real experiences. It's no one's pretending to be anything.
I've only met this man, John, twice now. He's amazing.
He is great.
He's
He's amazing.
He's authentic.
He's authentic.
That's why we get on.
And we're back to that idea of what is authentic, you know. And that is exactly what the Spanish guy said. He said, I'd love to be part of that. Well, I said we might do something
But
over
that's why I love these podcasts, because it's teaching me constantly, and not to keep bringing up the autism, but like conversations is one of my struggle, and these podcasts are making me, I can talk about stuff I'm interested in and mainly listen to people that I'm interested in, like how does that person think, and
it's like questions you would never ask in general, but then you can actually
Yeah,
be like, can I pull you aside for a minute?
It's like, is there something wrong with you? What are you talking about? We create a process. This fella's on drugs or something.
Yeah.
Like,
And the thing is, you see, here's an interesting thing. You mentioned there, drugs. I mean, another thing we can do is addiction. I'm fascinated with that.
Yeah.
And there's something about creativity and its opposite. Because straight away, we didn't go into this angle, but we spoke about it, Dylan, when we were preparing this, that as well as creativity, there's also destructiveness.
Yeah.
And destruction is in everyone.
And I think creativity is an antidote to that.
It is. And the thing is, I'm thinking of a boy who I won't mention his name because his both parents were addicts, right? And he was a brilliant musician, absolutely brilliant musician. And he said to me one time, he says, I didn't sleep last night because my ma's boyfriend was on the settee or on the couch.
Yeah.
And he says, I didn't get much sleep. Now, I knew he was going down the way of drugs as well, which self-destruction. And it was very hard. And myself and the headmaster at the time did our best to try and... The last communication, I has a child since and all of that, but the last communication that we had was him asking me how he would get off a drug, you know, where would he go? But anyway, I told him to go wherever it was, Mater Hospital or cool mind, I'd give them a few ideas. But the big thing about that this creativity is a way of fighting addiction too.
It's nearly funny because it's circular. It's like, why would I do that? Like, what's the meaning in that? But you'll only find out if you're doing it. It's like this funny thing, because if you tell someone who's severely depressed, which I think all of us here have experienced that,
Yes.
it's so hard to convince that person to do something productive, but it nearly becomes clear as they're doing it. They're like, oh my god, I feel so much better. Like, whatever it is, like I went for a swim, I went for a jog, I went with my camera. I just decided to go for a walk with my camera and take pictures. I went
or
and played the
dog.
piano. It can be anything, like, and that's as John put it, who we keep mentioning, the great videographer who made this possible. The meaning's in the doing, and I think with that, if you are both happy to wrap it up.
Oh, you wrap it up there,
yeah,
yes.
perfect.
Oh, yes.
I'll get your socials. So Deeshan,
it's Deeshan Camiah. It's DESHAN Camiah CAMIAH.
And
on that's Instagram.
That's on Instagram, and that's the main platform for all your photographs.
Main
Savage.
platform.
And I'd like to shout out our graphic designer who made our graphic on our YouTube channel. His name is David, and he's a very talented guy. His tag on Instagram is at Des_INI DES_IGNEYE. And I'd like to thank John of Kerboot Productions, who was our videographer in making this and the last podcast possible. And anyone you'd like to mention, Tim?
I'd like to thank Deeshan for being here today and for his
it was
company.
a great pleasure.
And look forward to working with him again. And
look forward to being back.
And yourself, Dylan. Always.
Thank you for putting this together.
Joy. Thanks for putting that. It's a lovely spot and it's a lovely place to meet.
Thanks to the both of you. So in wrapping up, you can find our podcast. I found this out, Tim. This is really cool. If you search at Share Your Perspective, you'll find our YouTube channel come up.
At Share Your Perspective.
At Share Your Perspective.